The average car payment is over $500 a month, and auto debt has risen 75% since the Great Recession of 2009. A lot of Americans are car poor, which means they're poor because of their car. That's one of the main things keeping people poor. And why is that? Let's talk about that. Please don't forget to subscribe for more videos on money, minimalism, our travel journey around the world. We publish a new video every week. Also, this is going to serve as the part 7 of the family money saving series because I wanted to do a whole video on saving money on transportation, but I really wanted to go into this car poor thing that people don't realize is an epidemic in America. And right before we get started, I do have a guide on kids and cars, everything from paying for the car to when should they start driving to all of those questions answered. So check out that guide. I'll put a link to that in the description. So the US Public Interest Research Group did a study that kind of shows some insight into why car payments are so high, why this auto debt has risen by so much. And this is one thing I wanted to start with. Auto lending rebounded from the Great Recession in part because of low interest rates, fueled by the Federal Reserve Board's policy of quantitative easing, and a perception by lenders that auto loans had held up better than mortgages during the financial crisis. As one hedge fund manager noted in a 2017 interview with the Financial Times during the recession, consumers tended to default on their house first, credit cards second, and car third. And the study goes on to show how auto lenders prey on their consumers. That's a really important part of this. So let's talk about predatory auto lenders. Auto lenders have their tactics. It's a $1 trillion industry, and their main goal is to make you finance more car than you need, and usually more car than you can afford. So what are these predatory tactics that they're using? Well, let's look at some of them from the study. Number 1, providing incomplete or confusing information about the terms of the loan, including interest rates. Number 2, making loans to people without the ability to repay. Number 3, discriminatory markups of loans that result in African American and Hispanic borrowers paying more for auto loans. Number 4, pushing expensive add-ons such as insurance products, extended warranties, and overpriced vehicle options, the cost of which is added to a consumer's loan. And number 5, engaging in abusive collection and repossession tactics once a consumer's loan has become past due. There are plenty of discount auto loan places, plenty of discount car dealerships. You drive by them every day, the ones that say bad credit welcomed and 0 down. These are the types of places that can give car dealers that sleazy reputation that they tend to have.
I'll make you an offer you just can't refuse. But you better buy now, because I got another guy who's really interested. He'll be by here any minute.
Not saying all of them are, but that is the reputation a used car salesman has. And if you're a used car salesman, you probably know that. I hope you're not one of the sleazy ones, but you probably know you have the reputation. And we've all seen the bullying tactics these car dealerships used, whether it's a new car dealership or a used car dealership, including the let me bring my manager in tactic, or the I'm gonna guilt you into buying this car that you've already told me you didn't want because you've wasted 10 or 15 minutes of my time and my time is valuable, therefore you need to buy this $30,000 car. The New York Times published an article about Yvette Harris, a citizen of New York who bought a used 1997 Mitsubishi for an outrageous price and was still stuck with the payments in 2017, over 10 years after the vehicle was repossessed. Nagam Jawad, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly and I apologize if I'm not, a refugee from Iraq, bought a Chevy Tahoe in 2009. The transmission went out a few months later. It was so expensive to fix, the lender didn't even bother repossessing it, but he was still liable for the loan for the next few years. These stories aren't unique. Most Americans are uneducated when it comes to auto loans, interest rates, and debt in general. Car poor Americans. So what keeps most Americans from financial freedom? From having a solid retirement portfolio? From being able to retire? From being able to afford the things that they want? It's not lattes and impulse buys that are keeping them from those big things. Most often, it's car loans. Think about this whenever we talk about that $500 average payment at the beginning of the video. $500 a month invested at an 8% interest rate over an entire typical adult lifetime would be over $2 million. But people would rather have a nice car than money. And I get it, you want a nice car, but there are ways to save and wait until you can actually afford a nice car. If you have to finance it, you can't afford it. I think a good rule of thumb is to pay no more than 5 times your monthly salary for a car. That way you can know where you're at and what kind of a car you can afford based on your current lifestyle. So figure out that amount, save first in a savings account, not as a car payment, build the interest on that, and then use the cash to pay for the car. The idea is to make interest-bearing car payments to yourself instead of paying interest on a car payment to a car dealership or to some other financial institution. If you can break free from the mindset of really caring what other people think about you or feeling like you deserve a nice car, then you're going to be a lot more financially stable, financially free. Why are people living the car poor life? When I say car poor, I'm not talking about the rare instances where someone needs a car, they can't quite afford it, but they have good credit and they get a 0% interest rate and they pay it off over a couple years. I'm talking about the people who always have had and always will have, always plan to have a car payment. I've had friends who had cars that they were upside down on, so they traded it in and added that loan amount to the new loan and did that several times. And then 10 or 15 years later, they're paying 3 times the amount of the car because of past loans. That's the kind of car poor I'm talking about. So why do people really live this way? It comes down to a handful of reasons. Number one, they think car payments are and always will be part of life. Number two, they don't want to be seen in an older, not as nice vehicle, so they spend their entire life paying for a car to impress other people who probably don't care. Number three, they want a nicer vehicle than they can afford, and they've decided that buying this vehicle is more important than having this amount of money for retirement, or anything else. So one of those reasons, in one way or another, typically encompasses the reasons Americans are living a car poor life. When I added up the value of how much I would spend on cars if I wanted to buy newer or really nice cars, when I added up the value over my lifetime of what I would spend, now I just can't bring myself to actually buy a $50,000 car knowing what I could do with that money instead. Plus, I hate to be so attached to a car that can so easily be broken, dented, scratched. Think about parking lots, storms, driving in general. It's just easier for me to not care about my material possessions when they're not worth as much. We'd rather spend our money on traveling and experiences. So if you actually think your car is the most important thing in the world to you, maybe reconsider that. But if you actually think that, then maybe spend all your money on it. But odds are you don't think that, and you don't realize you're spending your whole life to pay for what you're driving around every day. Reframing our view of vehicles. Buying a new car is great for a few months. And then the new car smell starts to fade, and then it just starts to become your regular car instead of your new car, but you're still stuck with the payments. So think about whether or not those first few months of happiness are worth paying that extra $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for that vehicle. Of course, if your primary goal is to impress people, you may still be happy a few years down the road. If your primary goal is to impress people, then you probably wouldn't be watching this video, and if you still are, you probably don't want to keep watching this video if your primary goal is to impress people, because you're not going to like anything else I have to say. You're definitely not going to achieve any sort of financial freedom, and most likely any sort of true happiness if your main goal is trying to impress other people. So you may not feel like your goal is to impress other people, but it may still be in there somewhere, and you may just not realize it. So how do you know if you're really trying to impress other people with your lifestyle? Ask yourself a few questions. Do you think about what you look like when you pull up and people are watching? Do you constantly show your friends all of the features on your vehicle? Do you park in places where your car will get noticed? Did you buy your vehicle so your family would have an equal vehicle to the other vehicles in your neighborhood? Those are a few of the questions you can ask yourself to determine if you're buying your vehicle for yourself, for your family, or to impress others. If you typically buy new vehicles and you typically pay large car payments, just ask yourself why you choose to buy a new vehicle versus an older, reliable vehicle. And don't go back to using the new vehicles are safer and the maintenance costs are less, so it makes more sense to buy new vehicles. Because first off, that's not always true. New vehicles aren't always safer. And is that really worth that extra $500,000 in your lifetime that you spend on cars? Like I usually do, all I'm doing is asking you to think about it. I'm not going to get into the weeds on finding a good deal and buying a good used car, because I did that in my guide to kids and cars, and I did a video on that as well that I can link the article and the video in the description. But again, if you do drive an expensive car, I would just ask you to reconsider, or at least consider why you do it. If you really think about why you're buying newer vehicles, you may be surprised at what the answer is. And if you feel yourself getting defensive in any way, you may have to search deeper for the answer. Saving money on transportation. If you have a fixed view on what you need for a car, I would ask you to think outside the box. Maybe reconsider it. Maybe you have 2 cars and you could actually go down to 1 car. Maybe you live in a place with great public transportation and you don't actually need a car. You may be able to get everywhere on a bicycle. Of course, if you live in a rural area, that's not true, but depending on your situation, a bicycle may do it. So instead of all the small tips and tricks on how to save money on a car, consider the big wins first. Maybe that means getting rid of a car entirely. Maybe that means getting rid of 2 cars and buying 1 or 2 older, reliable vehicles. I've met too many families who have a car payment that's larger than their house payment. Transportation can be a huge expense. Some people go to great lengths just to keep up their appearance, but a lot of times this is keeping people broke. Right now we have a minivan, and I've actually had people tell me, especially other dads, they say, why'd you get a minivan? Why didn't you go for the SUV? Or they make fun of the, oh, you're driving a minivan thing, alluding to an SUV being more stylish or still trying to stay hip or cool as a parent. And my response is always, because I like money. And because I would rather have the money than some sort of really nice SUV or vehicle. That's another example of how people are buying vehicles to impress other people whenever they should really just be thinking about what they can actually afford and what would make the most sense for their family. The bottom line is, if your vehicles are holding you back financially, you're doing it wrong. So we tend to buy vehicles that are a few years old, reliable, we get them checked out by a mechanic, but we don't spend tens of thousands of dollars on them. Again, go check out my guide to kids and cars, everything you need to know about kids when it comes to cars, and I go into saving money and everything on that as well. Please subscribe for more of these videos on money, minimalism, our travel journey around the world. Check out my book, Intentional Children, if you're interested in raising intentional children. I'll put a link to that in the description. That is all for today. I will see you next week.